The train was nearly empty when I boarded, just as I had hoped. It had been a long day, and I craved solitude during my journey home. I settled into a seat by the window, my thoughts drifting as the train's rhythmic clatter filled the carriage. My solitude was short-lived, however. At the next stop, the doors slid open, and a man stumbled in, his clothes stained with blood. Panic tightened my chest as I instinctively pressed back into my seat, my eyes locked onto the gruesome sight before me. The man's gaze scanned the empty carriage until it landed on me. Our eyes met, and time seemed to freeze. His bloodshot eyes were filled with madness, a chilling void that sent shivers down my spine. He was disheveled, his hands trembling as they clung to a bloodied knife. A voice in my head screamed at me to run, to flee from this living nightmare, but my body remained frozen, rooted to my seat. The man's lips curled into a malevolent smile, revealing teeth stained crimson. He approached slowly, each step echoing in the silent carriage. My heart hammered in my chest, and I could feel the bile rising in my throat. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the knife in his hand, its blade glistening in the dim light. As he reached my brow, the man stopped and stood before me, his bloodshot eyes never leaving mine. The scent of blood hung heavy in the air, suffocating me. I was certain that my life was about to end at the hands of this deranged stranger. But then, to my bewilderment, he moved past me and took the seat opposite mine. He settled into it, his gaze still locked onto mine, a chilling smile lingering on his face. My mind raced with fear and confusion. Why hadn't he attacked me like the others? The train continued its journey, but the atmosphere in the carriage was stifling. The man's presence was an oppressive weight, his blood-soaked clothes a grotesque reminder of his horrific deeds. We sat in silence, his unnerving smile never fading. It wasn't until the next station that chaos erupted. The doors slid open, and a flood of police officers swarmed into the carriage, their guns drawn. They surrounded the man, shouting orders for him to drop his weapon. I watched in a daze as they apprehended him, his eerie smile finally fading as the reality of his capture sank in. Later, I learned the horrifying truth. The man had gone on a murderous rampage that day, randomly killing 7 innocent people before boarding the train. The police were baffled as to why he had spared me. As I recounted the chilling events of that night to the detectives, I couldn't provide any answers. I had been as mystified by his actions as they were. Perhaps it was luck, fate, or something far more sinister that had spared me from his blood-soaked rampage. In the days that followed, I couldn't escape the feeling that I had been chosen, that I had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death. The memory of those bloodshot eyes and that malevolent smile haunted my dreams, leaving me with an unshakable sense of unease. For I knew that on that fateful night, I had looked into the eyes of a killer, and for reasons unknown, he had chosen to spare me, leaving me to grapple with the unsettling mystery of my survival. Sarah had had one of those days that felt like a never-ending nightmare. Everything had gone wrong at work, and by the time she left the office, she was emotionally drained. It was dark outside, and the train station was nearly deserted as she waited for her ride home. The train arrived, and Sarah stepped into the nearly empty carriage. She chose a seat by the window and gazed out at the passing cityscape. Her thoughts were a whirlwind of frustration and exhaustion, and she longed for something to break the monotony of her life. As the train made its way along the tracks, Sarah noticed a man sitting a few seats away. He was reading a book, his focus unwavering. What struck her most were his eyes, piercing blue, intense, and oddly comforting. Intrigued by this stranger, Sarah couldn't help but steal glances at him. Something about him drew her in, as if he held the answers to all the questions swirling in her mind. She watched him for what felt like hours, her fascination growing with each passing moment. Finally, unable to contain her curiosity any longer, Sarah gathered her courage and approached him. "Excuse me," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I couldn't help but notice you. Your eyes. They're incredible." The man looked up from his book, his expression warm and inviting. "Thank you," he replied, his voice gentle. "I could say the same about yours." Sarah blushed, flattered by the compliment. She introduced herself, and they soon found themselves engrossed in conversation. They talked about everything: dreams, fears, hopes. It was as though they had known each other for a lifetime, and Sarah felt a connection she had never experienced before. The train ride seemed to pass in the blink of an eye, and as they approached Sarah's stop, she couldn't believe her luck. She had met someone who made her forget about her terrible day, someone who made her feel alive again. With reluctance, she stood up to leave, promising to see him again. He smiled, his eyes filled with a warmth that made her heart flutter. "I'll be here," he said. Over the next few days, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the mysterious man on the train. She found herself rushing to the station after work, eager to see him again. They met at the same time, on the same train, and each encounter deepened their connection. Sarah's friends noticed the change in her. She seemed happier, more vibrant. She talked about the man constantly, telling them how he had brought joy back into her life. One evening, Sarah arrived at the station, her heart filled with anticipation. But as she stepped onto the train, her heart sank. The man was nowhere to be found. She searched each carriage, growing increasingly desperate, but he had vanished. Confused and heartbroken, Sarah tried to find information about him, but it was as though he had never existed. She asked an old lady who was on the train with them almost every time, but the elderly woman insisted that Sarah had been sitting alone whenever she saw her. However, she noticed that Sarah sometimes mumbled cryptic sentences. Days turned into weeks, and Sarah's despair deepened. She couldn't explain how someone who had felt so real, so tangible, could simply disappear. Her friends grew concerned, thinking she had imagined the whole thing, but Sarah knew the truth. She had fallen in love with a man who had never existed. As time passed, Sarah tried to move on, but the memory of the man on the train haunted her. She couldn't escape the feeling that she had encountered something otherworldly, something that had temporarily entered her life to bring her happiness before vanishing into the unknown. The train journeys became a lonely ritual, a reminder of what she had lost. And each time she boarded that train, she couldn't help but hope that, just maybe, he would reappear, bringing back the love and joy she had once known. But as the days turned into months, that hope began to fade, leaving her with a bittersweet memory of a love that had never been. A cold, moonless night had fallen as John boarded the late-night train heading home. His fellow passengers seemed tired, each lost in their thoughts or buried in their devices, seeking solace from the monotony of the daily grind. John, too, settled into his seat by the window, gazing at the passing darkness. The rhythmic clattering of the train wheels against the tracks almost lulled him into a trance. As the train pulled away from the station, an unsettling feeling washed over him. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but something about the atmosphere inside the carriage felt off. It was eerily quiet, too quiet for a train that should have been filled with the sounds of conversation and the rustling of newspapers. John's gaze drifted to his fellow passengers. They all appeared engrossed in their own worlds, headphones on or eyes fixed on their screens. Not a single person seemed to acknowledge or even notice one another. Attempting to brush off the eerie sensation, John turned his attention back to the window. The train passed through dark tunnels, and every now and then, the dim glow of a station flickered by, casting eerie, fleeting shadows inside the carriage. It wasn't until the train pulled into a station, one that John didn't recognize, that he began to feel a growing sense of unease. Passengers were disembarking, and new ones were boarding. But the newcomers exhibited the same unsettling behavior as those already on the train. No one spoke. No one looked at each other. They just moved with a strange sense of purpose, as if guided by an unseen force. John's heart began to race as he realized that he, too, felt compelled to maintain this eerie silence. Try as he might, he couldn't bring himself to speak or even make eye contact with his fellow passengers. The station announcements were distorted and incomprehensible, but that didn't matter. Everyone on the train seemed to know where they were going. John watched as the train pulled away from the station, carrying its cargo of silent, compliant passengers deeper into the night. The journey continued for what felt like hours. John was unable to check his watch, his phone, or even ask someone the time. It was as if time itself had come to a standstill within the confines of the train. Then, abruptly, the train came to a halt at a desolate station that seemed more like a ghost town than a bustling hub. The few passengers who disembarked vanished into the darkness, leaving John alone in the carriage. He strained to hear any signs of life outside, but all that met his ears was a haunting, oppressive silence. Panic welled up within him as he realized he had no idea where he was or how to get home. With trembling hands, John pressed the button to open the train doors. They slid open slowly, revealing only darkness beyond. The station's platform was devoid of life, its benches empty, and the lights flickered ominously, summoning every ounce of courage he had left. John stepped off the train, determined to find answers. As he ventured further into the abandoned station, he noticed a small sign, its letters faded and barely legible. Lost Souls Junction, it read. Dread washed over John. He had never heard of such a place, and its name sent shivers down his spine. Was this some kind of nightmarish purgatory? How had he ended up here? As John stood there, he heard the distant sound of a train approaching, and a sinking feeling settled in the pit of his stomach. He turned to see the same eerie train, its windows dark, pulling into the station. Its doors opened, revealing more passengers with vacant expressions. John's heart pounded as he realized there was only one option. He had to board that train and hope it would take him back to the world he knew. With a deep breath, he stepped back onto the train and settled into a seat. The doors slid shut, and the train began to move, carrying him away from the enigmatic Lost Souls Junction and back into the unknown. As the train's wheels clattered against the tracks, John couldn't help but wonder if he would ever escape this silent nightmare, or if he had become just another lost soul on an endless journey to nowhere. Are you scared now? Then please leave a like and subscribe. For more scary stories, click on one of these videos. Thank you.